Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, February 14th, 2019, and today we're going to be looking at a 2020 presidential election prediction between Senator Amy Klobuchar from the state of Minnesota. If you don't recall, she was up for re-election back in 2018, won overwhelmingly with around 60% of the vote, if I'm not mistaken. Donald Trump, of course, the incumbent president of the United States. Amy Klobuchar recently announced that she was running for president, and it's not really big news. A lot of people did expect her to run, and she was one of those top 2020 contenders. There is a history with her that necessarily in terms of treating her staff wasn't too good. That's something that possibly could come up and hurt her in the future, but I don't see it being such a really prominent issue in terms of the 2020 landscape. Happy Valentine's Day, by the way. And today we're going to just be looking at the overall electoral map between Senator Klobuchar and President Trump. So, of course, like we start out with all the safe Trump states or safe Klobuchar states, depending on which candidate that we choose to start off with. But this time around, I'm going to do it by poll closing time. So we'll start off with 7 p.m. around Indiana, Kentucky, and finish off in 1 a.m. around Alaska. And that'll be pretty interesting. So we're going to leave all the toss-up states toss-ups so we can come back to them. But for right now, we're going to fill in all the safe states. We will be doing this map by margins, which means that it won't just be safe and safe. It'll be safe, likely, and lean, and of course toss-up. And obviously, every state will be decided by the end of the video. For right now, the last time I made a video about this was not exactly a month ago, but January 9th, 2019. And Amy Klobuchar did win that video. She is now officially announced running for president, one of many people. And the list is going to just get longer and longer. Joe Biden probably isn't going to speak on it for a while, just going to keep America in suspense, and is probably going to run based off how the landscape looks now in terms of the approval rating of the president, which is ticking just a little bit upwards lately, but it doesn't exactly mean that it's drastically different. Obviously, after a State of the Union, the president always gets a higher approval rating than where they were before. And for Trump, it's still in the disapprove +5, +6. Rasmussen just came out with a poll that shows him approve +5, then the next day with approve +1. So it does fluctuate, but Rasmussen, I would say, is the only one that actually shows him as approved. The rest of them just show him as disapproved, but the numbers do fluctuate. Enough about that. Let's go through the video. So Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina. We know these states are predominantly Donald Trump states. South Carolina, Indiana, you could argue could go into the likely column. For the sake of this video, we're going to keep them in the safe column. Again, it really doesn't impact the Democratic Party if they are safe or not as of right now. Obviously, these states are not going to flip. For Amy Klobuchar, though, she can look to states like Vermont for her first 3 electoral votes bunch. Virginia, we will get back to, and Georgia, we will also get back to. 7:30 rolls around. West Virginia, of course, going to the president, does a phenomenal job there every single time, as if he's me saying that like he's done it more than once. But in terms of Republican candidates, they do phenomenal there every single time, which is what I meant to say. For Amy Klobuchar, she's not going to win in North Carolina or Ohio just yet or at all, depending on which state it is. But for right now, we leave those states in the toss-up column. 8 p.m. rolls around, you go into parts of the Bible Belt, Alabama, Mississippi, then you go to Tennessee, then you go to Missouri, then Oklahoma. Those are all safe states. Again, you can argue Missouri possibly could be a likely state, Mississippi possibly being a likely state, but for right now, it's fine being in the safe column. Going up to states like Illinois and states like Maryland, this is where the Democratic Party really starts reeling in a lot of numbers. Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, D.C., up in Maine, that first district I would characterize as a safe district for right now. I believe that characterizes all of the non-toss-up states, which is interesting because usually this area ends up in a tie. It goes from being 3 electoral votes for the Democrats to 76. Donald Trump at 76 right now. We're probably not going to characterize these just yet. Again, we're just doing safe for right now. Going over into the 8:30 p.m. poll closings, Arkansas rolls in, and then we can move into 9 p.m. Louisiana would be safe. Kansas would be safe again. Another one of the states you can argue, but not many people are going to argue that point as of right now. Every district except for the second one in Nebraska goes into the safe Republican column, North and South Dakota, Wyoming included. Not Utah just yet. The Sun Belt needs some time to discuss. Going over to the state of Minnesota, I would characterize that one as a safe state. It'll probably move into the likely column, but for right now, we want to get that one out of the way. And here's a big one. New York goes into the Democratic column. That one is pretty much expected, and that puts Amy Klobuchar at 115 electoral votes, Donald Trump at 109. Now we can move on into the 10 p.m. poll closings. We have Iowa, which is the toss-up for right now, Utah, which goes in the Republican column, Montana, which also goes into the Republican column, And I believe that is it. If Nevada does not, Nevada does go with them. But for right now, that one's going to be a toss-up. Now we move over into 11 p.m. and Idaho goes into the Donald Trump column. But of course, Amy Klobuchar as well in Washington, Oregon, California, which is a big one, puts her at 189, and Hawaii, which finishes off her safe tally at 193, and Donald Trump at 122, adding Alaska now at 125. It seems that every single video he starts off with 125, which is pretty much expected. The electoral map doesn't change that drastically between election cycles, and we're seeing the exact same toss of states that we saw back in 2016, give or take a handful. So with 125 electoral votes for Donald Trump, where can you make up the numbers? Well, first of all, Texas. This is a big one. We're just going to get this one out of the way. This one will probably be a likely state for him. It's still 38 electoral votes regardless going into his column. But you can expect that state to go into the likely column for Donald Trump. For Amy Klobuchar, we're actually going to remove 10 electoral votes from the safe column, move it into the likely column, a win regardless. Even though Amy Klobuchar is from the state of Minnesota, I do not think it's going to branch over 15%. I think that this presidential election is too partisan, and it's going to be very hard, even in your own home state, to win by that much in what a state used to be a swing state. Minnesota still holds some of its, swing state values, even with candidates from the state. I get it. She did well there in a statewide election, but this is also the presidential election. A lot more is at stake. Interesting. But for right now, Minnesota goes into the likely Democratic column. Other states that go into the likely Democratic column: Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico, and these states now total to 37 electoral votes in the likely column for Amy Klobuchar. She totals in at around 220 as of right now. That's expected. Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico have been Democratic states since 2016, 2012, 2008, and based off how they've done in midterm elections, it doesn't look like they're withering away from the Democratic Party either. If you look at 2018, expanded leads for the Democratic Party. If you go back to 2010, however, and 2014, the Republican Party did improve just a little bit, but the Democratic base really has been solidifying on these states. New Mexico possibly could be a safe state by 2020 if Gary Johnson does decide not to run, which he already said he hasn't, but then he did run for New Mexico Senate race, and of course did not win. Otherwise, that would have been big news, but right now, New Mexico goes in the likely Democratic column. Going up to the Northeast, I would actually characterize Maine at large as a likely state, but I do think that second district will narrowly, and when I say narrowly, I mean narrowly, go into the Donald Trump column. For the state of New Hampshire, Donald Trump has not been doing too well there in terms of approval, in terms of policy appeal to New Hampshire. He didn't win there number one in 2016. I get it was close, but he's already lost so many voters in these states that losing voters does not push you over close. In fact, it makes it worse for you. So for right now, I'm going to keep New Hampshire still in the lean column because I do think that, again, because it is a presidential election, it will eventually narrow down. But it's always interesting seeing those states. It used to be close and then all of a sudden dropping away from the candidate that almost won there before. For Georgia, I would characterize that one as a likely GOP state. I do not think Amy Klobuchar is going to do very well in terms of bringing out the African-American vote, which is something that Democrats really need to do this election season, but Amy Klobuchar also has solidified her areas around the Rust Belt, which is something that is really going to help her. For the state of Arizona, I would characterize that one as a lean GOP state, and this is a big one. This is a big call. Florida, I would characterize as a lean GOP state. There are not many Democrats, I think, can win in Florida. This state itself has shown its Republican identity in 2018, and I get it. It was a very, very, very close race. A lot could have impacted it. And yes, maybe my conclusion about this state would be different. But if you look back, 2014, Republicans, 2018, Republicans, 2016, Republicans, the trend continues. And looking at the state, I get it. A candidate could technically appeal to Florida voters enough to flip it. I'm not saying that is impossible. But do you really imagine yourself seeing Amy Klobuchar rallying Latino voters, flipping Cuban voters in the state of Florida, when she has a much better base with the white working class, with voters within her home state, voters like the ones within her home state, such as Iowa voters or Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio voters? And how well do you think that a senator from Minnesota can appeal to the people of Florida? And I get it, it's been won there before. Barack Obama came from Illinois and won down in Florida. But he also had appeal to a lot of minority voters. Amy Klobuchar, you can't exactly say the same thing. So for right now, Florida is going to go into the narrow Donald Trump column, joined by North Carolina. Again, appealing to African-American voters is going to be everything for certain candidates. Amy Klobuchar just may not need that, as you might see at the end of this video. Over in Nevada, I think this one's going to retain in the Democratic column in terms of its Democratic identity. For the 2nd district in the state of Nebraska, I'm going to narrowly give that one to Donald Trump. I do think he's going to narrowly win there in the state of Ohio. I'm going to give that one narrowly to the president, which puts him at 254 electoral votes. He's inching up, but if you look at the remaining 3 states that we're looking at right now, you know what's about to come next. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. In fact, I'd actually characterize Wisconsin and Michigan as likely states for the Democratic Party. Now, that officially puts Amy Klobuchar at 278 electoral votes. And to be honest, who is super surprised about this? These states are states that pretty much align with how her state votes every time. The only difference between them, with Minnesota and those 3 states in 2016, was 2 percentage points. So if you're looking at that, she's able to appeal to her voters very well. And she's probably going to be able to do the same in terms of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania voters. Pennsylvania probably the least because they do disapprove of the president the least, -12. Keep that in mind. But I do think it will narrow up for an election season, but I do expect these states to flip back to the Democratic column. For the state of Iowa, that is a pretty close state, in my opinion. I do think Amy Klobuchar can do very well amongst rural voters, flipping back a number of those previous Obama voters that turned into Trump voters in 2016. And it is a very real possibility that she's able to grasp onto those voters and bring them back. In terms of her appeal to these voters in these states, especially doing so well across the Rust Belt, I mean, making these states likely states isn't exactly the easiest thing to do. Looking at Iowa, very real possibility that this state does flip. Now, I'm just going back and forth right now in my head between Iowa going to Trump and Klobuchar, and I really do not like leaving states in the toss-up column. So I'm going to end up with this one narrowly in the Donald Trump column, very narrowly, meaning it could possibly, I did not mean to do that, meaning it could possibly flip either way. That one is one that I really wish we had a tilt feature for this. But Iowa, I would narrowly put in the Donald Trump column, giving him a total of 260 electoral votes and Amy Klobuchar at 278. His approval rating has gone up in a couple of states, but not enough to make that drastic of an impact, not to recover from -18 in those 2 Rust Belt states and then -12 in Pennsylvania. But if you're still looking at the numbers, it's still not looking good for the president, but again, he has improved just a tad bit, but that doesn't say much, especially if you're already underwater overwhelmingly. So that wraps up today's video. Thank you guys for watching today's video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.